Hello. Good afternoon. I know many people are still coming in and getting settled, but we want to get started since there's a lot to talk about and do today. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful afternoon at the museum. I know there's a lot going on today in town, and we're so glad you're here with us. My name is Danielle Knapp. I'm the McCosh Associate Curator here at the museum. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to this program, a special talk by Dr. Joby Patterson, our guest curator for the new exhibition, Chipping the Block, Painting the Silk, the color block prints and serigraphs of Norma Bassett Hall, and the author of the newly published, fresh off the presses, Catalogue Raisonné of the prints, which is available for sale. And if you're a museum member, it's 10% off at our front desk, and we'll have a book signing and a reception following today's program. So we'd be really pleased if you would stay after the program and help us celebrate this wonderful publication and the work of this great artist. Dr. Joby Patterson is a specialist in 20th century prints and many other fields within art history. She's been a teacher, a collector, a researcher, and she's worked with the museum and taught classes for the UO Art History Department, so we know her very well here. As a Fulbright Research Fellow, she published Wooden Churches of the Carpathians, a comparative study, and on a Smithsonian Fellowship, she published Bertha E. Jacques and the Chicago Society of Etchers. This is her third publication. It's an absolutely beautiful book. There's one also available in the front lobby to take a look at today if you'd like. So Joby's going to get started down here with her presentation, and then we'll all go upstairs for a tour. And then, as I mentioned, as soon as that's over, please join us downstairs in the reception hall on the other side of the museum. Thank you so much, and please help me welcome Joby.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, everyone. Just as I arrived, one of my friends who came with me from Seattle had received a piece of paper, and she suddenly burst out laughing, and I wondered why. She said, "It says on the paper, when did you first hear about today's program?" And she laughed because she's known about it for about 12 years. So it is pretty funny. Well, let me put Norma Bassett Hall in something of a context. 100 years ago, World War I began with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand of Austria in Sarajevo. In Oregon, by August of the same year, a young student at the Portland Art Association was just finishing her studies. This photo was taken in what was the basement of the Portland Art Museum in 1914. So you can see, I showed this picture because it gives you a sense for what 100 years can be and how much difference there was in the kind of training and life that she had compared to what we have these days. Even the electricity has been added to this room, and it's obviously in the basement. Not to be fooled, though, the single man in the room is William Wentz, who was fresh from New York and a fresh education at the Art Students League. So what you see isn't exactly what you might think. But she got a good education there, but this is what it was like in 1914. Norma had just applied in this year for entry as an advanced student at the Art Institute of Chicago. Not long after graduation in 1918, Norma Bassett launched her career as a block print artist and continued to make prints for some 30 years until about 1951. For me, it's been a 10-year road of exploration to learn about the events of Norma Bassett Hall's life. She lived an adventurous, exciting life, and I continue to be impressed that she and her husband, Arthur William Hall, who was also an artist, packed so much into those 35 years. They were restless travelers, and they lived in many places. I had to investigate to see whether I could get enough material to form a book. After Norma's death in 1957, it was quite likely that her papers was discarded. And this was my first big disappointment. It took me 2 years to really begin to realize that I was never going to find the original papers, which makes it extremely difficult to research an artist when you don't have her own original block of information. I had to go out to museums and other places and extract what material I could as the other half of the correspondence, for example, of materials that she would have had. And there are some things that were thrown away or lost that will never be recovered. And this particular aspect of her life left me with a lot of issues and questions which still aren't answered, although I did find enough to make a book. Norma Bassett Hall and her husband were restless travelers, and they lived in many places. I had to investigate to see whether or not I could get enough material to form the book. There was little correspondence except what relatives or friends had, and also whatever I could turn up in museum archives. Worse yet, Norma hardly dated anything, and certainly not her prints. Even on Christmas cards, she would simply write December 23rd, no year. How could I get a biography in Catalogue Raisonné on such little information? It could be assumed that I was attracted to her because of the appeal of her art, but in fact, initially that was not the case. I wanted to know how a woodblock artist fared in the greater scheme of the movements and trends in printmaking during her era, and when other forms of printmaking dominated. So my first curiosity was intellectual rather than aesthetic. And you can see she was born in 1888. Her education in the time that I was really wanting to investigate was from about 1900 until 1918, during this part of her life, during the formal education of her life took place during those years. In my previous research, I had taken on the study of 745 intaglio works at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., and after 5 years, I had grown tired of black and white prints. So for my new research project, I decided I'd go the opposite direction. I would search for a color block print artist. I knew of Norma already. She was the artist who, according to one critic, made the most delectable block prints. Being a woman only enhanced her appeal for me, and when I discovered she was from Oregon, in rural Oregon, it was almost a go. She was born near Halsey. I say almost a go because what were my continuing reservations? For me, in research, it's the pleasure of the hunt, the joy of discovering that is my reward. The topic of long investigation has to offer new insights. Finding new information that invites new interpretation, that adds to knowledge of the era, that adds to or changes the commonly held earlier perspectives is valuable. After about 2 years of questioning and resolving the fact that I couldn't find the original papers and would have to work without those, I realized that the topic was going to be rich in rewards. I said I'd talk about some of the research adventures and surprises I encountered. There were many down every facet or angle I took in pursuing every line of inquiry. I'll give you a few examples of some of discoveries. I experienced a grand step forward when Cottage in Sky was featured on Antiques Roadshow, and that was when it was in Portland in 2004. My son Aram, who is here, by the way, who lives in Portland, called me. I missed the program, but next day, the owner of the print called, and as luck or circumstance would have it, this owner was on my son's soccer team. So I found the owner, and also the people who had called, the woman who had called in, who was a relative of Hall, and from that contact, I ultimately found 13 family members who had information and knowledge to offer. So that's when I really got the go. Another example. The Halls spent 2 years traveling in Scotland and France. Some of Norma's print titles revealed locales in Europe, like Street of Villefranche or Touriette-sur-Loup, but others are vague, like Village Fountain. From postcards Norma sent home, which were preserved by a nephew, and then the nephew mailed photocopies of those to me, I had a vague knowledge as to where the Halls were, mainly from postmarks, and a few sentences on the cards from Norma. We decided, Jim and I, my husband, that I had enough information to go see, and we decided to go see what we could find. Let me tell you, for me, there's not much more fun in research than having to go from village to village on rural roads and paths in Provence in search of an artist. As it turned out, I found the location of nearly all prints. In the village of St. Paul, we went to find the location of Washerwomen of St. Paul. It was not obvious. The place where this wash basin was behind a 19th century fountain in the vaults that were used as a lavoir or a washing trough. You find these often in former Roman provincial villages. Then higher up the main serpentine walk of St. Paul was this print called Village Fountain. We guessed because of the styles of the fountains in this whole village were the same as the one in this print called Village Fountain. When I saw it, there were 2 black labs frolicking in the wash basin portion of the fountain, and that print is on display in the Jordan Schnitzer gallery upstairs. In Villefranche-sur-Mer, I said to Jim, with these copies of this postcard in my hand, well, they lived at Maison Sassot. Let's look for Maison Sassot. And Jim looked above my head and he said, you mean that Maison Sassot? The building was inscribed above the entry, right behind us. This is on the outskirts, near the fortifications at Villefranche-sur-Mer. We also found the locations where Norma stationed herself for the panoramas of Touriette-sur-Loup, which you see here. Other village titles formed other prints that she made, Gautier and La Gaude. The Halls bought bicycles and rode from one village to the next, all around the Alpes-Maritimes, where these villages percés were located. And I'll read you a letter that she sent back that's dated January 4th, 1926. Quote, we have at last invested in the long talked of bicycles, so we shall do a lot of skylarking about the country from now on when the weather is good. Got second-hand ones for about $10 a piece, which isn't a very heavy investment, surely. When there are so few hours of sunlight, it seems too bad to use it up getting to and from the places we want to work. And we want to explore some of the quaint old towns that are scattered all about the hills here. I'll give you an example of investigating I have 2 examples for investigating in archives. One is a private archive and one was a public archive. I came across this tiny photo in a family album, long treasured but seldom opened. Here's the photo. And that photo is huge here, but that photo is about this big. It's amazing what they can do these days with digital characters. Norma is in a field, a Vermont field, painting as her nephews stack hay on wagons. I knew of the print entitled Haying in Vermont, which is unusual for its location. It was the only print she did in Vermont that ever was published or done. This photo from the album and the print meshed together, both dating from the mid-1930s. This was a rather easy match, but quite fun. And as I saw it, I looked in that and I immediately envisioned the 2 juxtaposed near each other in the book. And by the way, you can see one ox, but there are 2 oxen there, and they are named Dime and Dave. Portree Bay, which is on the cover of the book, is one of my favorite prints. It also became the cover for American Architect in 1931. What you see here is obviously the Architect issue. One day, an antique dealer in Boston called me. Would I like a proof of Portree Bay? And oh, by the way, a letter came with it. Would you like that too? This letter proved to give some insights into Norma's philosophy of life and art. It jived with the arts and crafts philosophy and explains why in Norma's art there are no views of war or the Depression, both of which Norma went through. She lived through she died in 1957, so she experienced all those events prior to 1950 that took place in the U.S. Before the early part of the 20th century. So it explains why there are no views of art of war or depression. This short letter helped me greatly in fleshing out the content of the book, and it verified her position as an arts and crafts artist. And of course, in research, one always likes to get some kind of cross-verification if possible. So I'll read you a portion of this letter. And you can read it for yourself if you buy the book. Portree Bay has been one of my most popular prints. I hope you will continue to enjoy it always. A picture, like a friend, should grow dearer upon long acquaintance. My ambition is to make my prints speak of peace and tranquility in the troubled world, of joy in simple things, of harmony and beauty. So, you see, I am hopelessly old hat in my attitude toward both life and art. You can see someone who's thinking these things is not going to make her next image a bread line on a New York street. And it was part of the arts and crafts philosophy. Their idea was design and decoration, perfection in design and coloration, and things that are visual but are not emotionally loaded with a kind of social background content. At University of California, Berkeley, in the Bancroft Library, I was looking at papers of a woman journalist and friend of the Halls who lived and worked in Santa Fe, trying to find connections to Norma since the Halls bought that journalist's house in 1944. I wanted to turn up some information about that. There was not much information covering the 1940s, but to my surprise, I found that the journalist and her artist husband lived in Villefranche-sur-Mer the same 6 months that Norma and Arthur did in 1926. The Halls had known the journalist from far earlier than the 1940s, which I hadn't known. So I mostly got information on Villefranche-sur-Mer and the 1925-6 period instead of the 1940s, and so that enriched a different part of the book. Probably the Halls told other people and family about their time in Villefranche and Europe, but we wouldn't know today except that someone first wrote a record of these eventful days and someone else preserved it. Some information is recovered and recoverable, but also events of importance are lost in the diliquescent passage of time, and I felt the effects of both in my research. There are many questions I didn't get answers to that I could ask Norma if she were alive. But you have to go with what you have, and one of the most difficult issues is being sure that you have enough information from key parts of any subject's life so that you don't, have 10 years of deep knowledge and then a 15-year gap with nothing, and then you just have to have a kind of even distribution. And fortunately, I think I managed to do that. A point of attraction for me was Norma's successful marriage to another artist. Especially with women, one always has to ask the marriage question, because, especially then, it was generally not acceptable for a woman's career to dominate a marriage, or at least play a major role as it is in a man's career. For the Halls, they managed a successful marriage because early on, Arthur abandoned the idea of being a block print artist. He turned to etching and watercolor. The Halls shared the love and appreciation of art. They did not compete in technique, and he's the one who gave in, not Norma. I think she was going to do it no matter what, and he knew it was either take Norma and not block prints or do block prints without her. So he chose to stay with her. A word about monograms. This is something that I really love, and this is really a wonderful aspect of research with Norma. Norma cycled through variously designed monograms. In this particular monogram in print, you're looking at the huge close-up of a print entitled Marigolds, and it's not exhibited upstairs. This belongs to the University of Arizona, and it's not here. Is a particularly arts and crafts design, this particular way of doing the NBH. Let me show you the whole image. It's only fair that you see the whole thing. Here's the total print, done in 1929. So in this particular monogram, the fir tree and initials show the letters arcing over the tree, and I think this was Norma's continual tribute to the fact that she never forgot Oregon. This is so reminiscent of Oregon that I think it's based on her memories of Oregon. In Norma's work, she principally used woodblock carving and serigraph as her means of printmaking. Enlarged, we can see the differences in the two techniques by viewing the monograms, and while we see them enlarged, there are some things worth pointing out that you cannot see unless you have really good eagle eyes upstairs. It's hard, but up in this area, for example, or you can scan the whole area, and you can perhaps pick out squarish frameworks with a mound of color piled up in between each one of those squares. And this is the look of a silkscreen print. This is the look of a serigraph. The ink has been squeegeed through the silk screen, and then when it goes onto the paper, that's how it's revealed. When you lift the whole framework that has that silk on it, that leaves these indentions, and you have these little dollops that stand up in between each one of these the squarish forms. You do not see that in a block print, of course. Block prints are made entirely differently, where you have the high point of the wood block carries the color, and then the paper is placed on top of that colored area and pressed down, and the idea is that the color transfers to the paper, and that's an entirely different way of making a print. And these are the two ways that Norma used. So when you go upstairs, you can look at Home of a Spanish Cobbler and see if you can see these, and in any serigraph, you should be able to see it. A point of interest is that the print upstairs is not the one photographed. And this one, you can see the word home below it. This particular monogram is in the lower left corner of the print. When you go upstairs and find the print, it's in the northwest corner of the gallery, you'll see that the monogram is in a different place. This is probably a block carved, of course, in reverse, which Norma would have stamped on the print when she finished it. Other prints, I think in one of the stages of the carving, she would have had carved a little monogram also. This, I think, was an independent stamp, a cartouche, that she could have moved and placed in different places on a print. So she used both methods. I could talk about the publication process. People have asked about that. I didn't know for 10 years how the book was going to be done, whether it was digital, self-published, published by an academic press, or a commercial press. I even had some thousands stored away in case I needed to publish it myself. I learned from earlier experience that you just about have to have a whole book, a concise story of all illustrations before a publisher will consider you. I had not bothered to send it anywhere yet. After 10 years and a rather complete manuscript, Pomegranate was the first press that I tried. And after I sent them most of the book, but this would have been in a form that's a little different than you see now, but the basic meat was there, then they wanted to see the images. And I thought, okay, Norma, you're going to have to fly on your own. So I sent those, and they liked them. And so we got together. But as I signed with Pomegranate, this was about a year ago. It was in July, a year ago. I immediately had separation issues. I was giving to someone else all the material and discoveries I had made over the past 10 years of my research life. Norma was mine. You know, I owned her. I owned whatever I'd gotten from her. Of course, I intended to let them have it, the publisher. Once I got over that, I began at their pace, going through legal steps first, then working with an editor to improve the manuscript. I went from the thoughtful, ponderous, scholarly researcher I had been for a decade to suddenly dealing with the staff who were organized, goal-directed, commercially inspired multitaskers. I thought I'd left them behind when I went to Singapore for Christmas after sending off the manuscript to them. Even before I landed 20 hours later, I had emails. I had not even brought a manuscript with me. Finally, I told them I had to quit. My family was not seeing me. I did not necessarily have the right information, and there was a 16-hour time difference. I was tired. I'm grateful to all the donors and family members who provided prints and material, to the always reliable librarians and archivists through the country, and to the staff at Pomegranate, and to Jill Hartz, who was willing to take on an unknown artist, and the staff at the Schnitzer for all they have done to bring the book and exhibition to fruition. Norma truly deserves all this, as you'll see when you view her work for yourselves. You can make your own judgments. I'll walk you through the gallery and take questions as we move along. At some point, I think I can be signing books when we will go into the Papet reception hall on the other side of the museum toward the end. And and then one last point, this exhibition or something similar will be traveling to the Wichita Art Museum. So that will be in 2015. So thanks. And I think now, Danielle, we would just go ahead and go on up to the gallery. Okay. So we can do that. Thank you. May I start here at the beginning? I would like to introduce a book of prints which Norma and her husband did. It's probably, or at least as far as I know, and I've looked and tried to find comparisons and other examples, potential examples. As far as I can ascertain, it is the only book of prints made by a pair of American artists. This is on the idea of the Japanese idea of making a book like Hokusai's 36 Views of Mount Fuji. This is the Hall's 22 views of Cannon Beach, and it's called Some Prints of Cannon Beach. They made this to celebrate their marriage in 1922. You saw the marriage photograph that was in a field in Portland near Norma's parents' house. And if you look on the back, you see even from the very cover, so you have to kind of look on the back, you'll find that even the cover is just beautiful. And it is made with the blocks also. The entire book is made this way. And each image has a flyleaf which gives the title. So this one is called Dragon Trees. And you need to see in the cartouche below whether it says NBH or W, what is it? William, can't remember what his middle name is. A.W. Hall, thank you. Thanks, Kay, I see, thank you. Family member here. Then if you look just behind on the wall, you can scan the iPad and you can see every image. We couldn't do that here, but you can see the entire book by scanning that, and then there's a bit more information. This particular book was done in what I would call the ultimate example, the most beautiful, purely representational idea of what Arthur Wesley Dowell considered part of the arts and crafts tradition. They are very heavily Japanese-influenced prints. They have stylistically, for example, with Dragon Trees, the trees are greatly extended greatly toward the foreground so that trees are cut off. So you have a very abrupt foreground and then further back a background. Some of the Oregon prints that we see over here also do that. She liked doing that with water, which of course you can find a lot of in Oregon. So let's go down. I think I'll just go along this wall around the exterior periphery, and then I'll come to the interior island stands. Geographical location, and we've also emphasized technique. So those are the two things that you'll find as you go along. Here we have 3 prints of Oregon: Mount Hood, Haystack Rock, and Whale Cove. These are all places on the Oregon coast. One reason I decided to do the book on Norma was on the internet, when her items were being sold, I was really tired of seeing Haystack Rick being sold. And I thought, this needs to be fixed. So that was one thing that inspired me or motivated me to do this research. Next is a set of 5 Christmas cards. Both she and Arthur would do Christmas cards for their annual mailing, and we have 5 of her cards here. There were others that I have, but they are in private collections in different places and not easily gotten. But these 5 we do have. And they are, I think we positioned them chronologically. And interestingly enough, they come from 5 places where the Halls lived. The first one is Kansas, second one Oregon, Third one, Virginia. Few people know that they lived in Virginia. There's a Virginia image. This is Santa Fe, where they lived for about 5 years. And this is back in Oregon, is my guess. I'm not positive about that one, but it looks pretty Oregon to me. So these are lovely little works that were sent out. Someone asked me about wove paper and Japanese paper, and I'll just do a little explanation of that. Japanese paper is typically what is used for a block print. Wove paper was what she used when she made other kinds of prints, because her other medium, as I had mentioned, is serigraph. A serigraph, she basically used the wove paper, which is not made in the same way as the Japanese paper, and they receive the ink and the pigments differently. So that's why it was considered quite essential that Japanese paper be used for the block prints. The pigment is water-based, and the pigment goes down into the fibers of the paper, and there it will rest depending on how the density of the pigment. So some of the heavier pigments will go toward the bottom, or the lower part, they'll sink down into the paper. And this is all under microscopic examination, but when you look at a print, you'll see it gives a kind of luminescence and a kind of vibrance. And that's one of the characteristics of a block print. A couple of quick ways to tell a block print, usually from a serigraph. This isn't always, but in the case of Norma, it's about 90% accurate. Block prints often have borders, and that was done by the artist so that when the block carving didn't come out quite at the same on the edge, if you have a border, then that covers up that, it masks that irregularity. Norma mostly put borders around her block prints, and serigraphs, no borders there, except Norma made some exceptions. And we do have, I know of one serigraph that does have a border, but that's quite unusual. And on the other hand, there are also some prints down here that are block prints which do not have borders. The Navajo land down below, so down this way. So I guess it's a large crowd, and I don't want to lose everybody or waste a lot of time. But if you have a question which can be answered fairly quickly, I could take questions as you see them or as it's appropriate. Yes?
Did she begin serigraphs when she was in Santa Fe?
She did. She began in serigraphs in 1944 when Louis Ewing had brought in the WPA method of doing serigraphs with Vernon Hunter, taught Louis how to do it. And serigraphy arrived in Santa Fe in 1944, and she was Norma on the spot. So this is, as I said, we're doing something emphasizing technique, and the entire row of prints here are all made for the print which was called Old Sycamore. The final image at the end, just by the door, is the final proof. In other words, the final product. These other prints are demonstration prints which show the buildup of colors. So we start with the key block, which she did in this case, but not always. And we end up with the final print at the end. This print, all the captions are masked out. They're underneath the mats. But this one is called Blue Sky, I think she called it. And this one she called Key Block. This one she called Green and Orange. And she just put in this bit of green. Most blocks, it takes a block to make a color. And each block represents a color. Sometimes more colors can be put on one block if it's practical for the artist to be able to print them. They can't be touching each other or near each other, but sometimes an artist can get more than one color on a block, but usually every color is represented by a block. In this case, she has already done the blue. Then on the next block, she's carved only what would be the orange and the green. But they are on the same block, and they can be because the green is separate, and she could apply the color there and apply the orange and manage to do that on one block. But this is not always done. Experts do it, though, because it takes in this case, 7 blocks to make this print.
Were these preserved like this with the idea of demonstration?
They were, and
They were preserved.
they were. All these things have been preserved. We have to thank people for, that's why I love librarians and archivists and collectors who take care of things. These prints have been, for the most part, they're owned by family. They've been stored away for more than 60 years.
I was thinking about the artist. Did she have the idea to?
She did. I can't prove it. I don't have all the information, but I'm pretty sure this was all done for a demonstration, because one would never really see this. The artist would never really proceed quite as this is done. This isn't finished, so to proceed, she would keep going with the colors here, and she didn't. She stopped because this is showing the blue stage, and then this is showing the next stage. It was deliberately done to show the stages. So one point to make right here is the overprinting of colors, which can be done. She put yellow over what was blue, and in doing that, she got another tone of green. So you don't always have to have a new block for every color. You can get colors. I've tried counting the colors in certain prints. I can get up to about 15, but I can't get beyond that very easily. So anyway, you can look at these and see the build-up. Another interesting thing here is this particular print, to my eye, appears to be more complete than this one, but in fact it's not. It's just that in making prints, no two prints are ever the same, and this one has a kind of vitality that this one doesn't, but this one has a final run right through here of a beige color, which doesn't exist on this one. And then in this corner, the idea here was to show something about the creation of a print. So on the left side, there are 2 block prints which are black and white, because Norma, after she studied at the Art Institute, decided that she hadn't enough education in carving blocks, so she studied with Noel Rook in London for 3 months at the end of her stay in Europe. And during that time, she made this print, probably, Washerwomen of Biot. And of course, she would have made this drawing earlier when she was in France, in Biot, but then she finished off the carving of the block later on, probably under Rook in 1927. Yeah, it's okay. So then the bottom 2, or the last 2 prints on the left, images on the left, are actually gouaches and watercolors. They're not block prints. They are workups for a preliminary work for doing other prints. But neither one was ever made into a print, into a block print. And that's why we have them. Often the drawings are destroyed as the print's being made. But on the first watercolor here, there's a large margin down below which doesn't show here. And in that margin, she goes 1, gray, 2, blue, 3, red. She's got the colors laid out as she's preparing to lay out the individual blocks, but it was never completed, as I say. And then the far corner, this is a watercolor and gouache also. It's a market in Provence. And I'm fascinated by it because in the background on the left, you all have to look at this when you can. There is a distinctive figure who has a red background behind him, and he's wearing black. And the stark background indicates that she wants us to see that figure. It's clearly pointed out. And of course, we don't know who was in that market in Provence in 1926 or 27, but I think it was Matisse. You can look and decide for yourself. I checked, and he was living in Provence at that time. There's no reason why it couldn't be. And in my experience and research, things like that happen. And then on the far wall, there are 4 prints of the same image. It's called Navajo Land. And we have, on the far left is what is called a preliminary drawing. And then the next three are final proofs. So the preliminary drawing, it's not really a drawing, Norma called it that. It isn't a drawing, but it's a workup of a block. And it's an initial printing of a block. It's probably 3 colors there or so. Then the next 3 prints are all final proofs. They're finished, they're ready to go. You want to buy it? Give me $12 and I'll sell it, or whatever it was. And yet they're all different. And I wanted to do this because I wanted to demonstrate how prints look different, even though they've gone through the same process. The inks or the colors in one case will be a little more wet, a little more dense. The paper will be more receptive because it happens to be a little wetter. All these things take place. Plus, she did this particular print in an edition of 50. How are you going to work up that much coloration and keep it going without, you have to keep everything wet all the time, the paper, the pigments, and so you get variations in the prints. So this is what the connoisseur does. Someone might want one of those prints and not the other one. They might definitely prefer one because it's got an aesthetic attraction that the other one doesn't have. So this is those are 3. One of them says edition 100 on it. Another one says 10/50. Originally, she had intended to make 50 proofs, but then it was so successful that she increased the edition to 100. But those 50 were out the door, so what did she do? She just, then she changed the bottom number to 100 instead of 50. So, and then we can, so I guess, let me just talk about this block right here. As far as I know, this is the only block left from her work. And she made 94 prints, and about 85 of those were block prints. And each print, this one, for example, Old Sycamore, would have had at least 7 blocks. So let's say she had an average of 5 blocks. The Portrait Bay that I showed you, part of that letter, it said she took 7 blocks to do it. I didn't read that part. So 7 blocks to make Portrait Bay. So let's say we'll count it as a low figure. 5 times 85. How much is that? That's how many blocks could have been made. Oh, well, but then we divide it in half because she would have used both sides. You still have a lot of blocks, and people, when Norma died, Arthur remarried, and somewhere along the line, he of course inherited her work. He didn't die until 1981. He inherited all her work. Somewhere along the line, the blocks got thrown away. When I was in the last place where they lived, which is the place called Rancho del Rio, near Alcalde, New Mexico, halfway between Taos and Santa Fe, I even looked behind the buildings to see maybe there's something there, I couldn't resist. It could, who knows what happened. Anyway, this particular block was taken by Arthur to an art dealer in Tucumcari. And he said, "You've been so good to me all these years, I'd like to give you this as a thank you." So this block got separated from the rest of her blocks, and that's why it survived. So this is one of the blocks for Navajo land. And it has 2 sides, so that means 2 runs of color. But she cut the Kento marks, the marks that are made in the corners that allow for the paper to be registered correctly. She cut Kento marks top, bottom, and top, bottom. That means she not only turned the block over, but she turned it around. So she got 4 runs from this. And that is why you see the Navajo shirts, the red Navajo shirts are up here in the sky. Because they're not. she turned the block around, and then she could print the Navajo coloration, which was separate. And the same thing on the back. There would have been another block. All the sky is not represented on these blocks, so there was at least one more block. So this is one of the blocks from which these prints were made. And another really, really wonderful thing about Norma, she studied under Mabel Royds in Scotland in 1925. She studied Japanese printmaking from Mabel Royds, who was an expert. And at that time, Mabel used wood. She used blocks which she got at Woolworths, which were cutting boards. And I think this is a cutting board. Do you agree? Everybody agree? Here's the thing. This is one piece of cherry. It can't warp, and it's being constantly subjected to water because she's making 100 prints from it. And it actually would have been 400 because we've got all the different runs of the different colors. So the block is constantly wet, and it can't be allowed to warp or it won't work. Even now, this was done in 1947, even now this block could be used to make a print. And her teacher, not Mabel Royds, but the teacher of Mabel Royds, in his book, Frank Morley Fletcher, his name was, he's the dean of Japanese block print making in Britain. He's the same thing as Arthur Wesley Dow is here in the United States. The two guys were working at the same time at the turn of the century on exactly the same thing without really knowing each other. It's just one of those interesting events of independent development at the same time. But Fletcher has a whole description in his book about how you make the block, about you make the rabbit and you're in the carpenter's tools for a while before you even get to do anything with the block. And by the way, that is why these are called arts and crafts artists, these artists who did all this from the beginning to the end, because the craft was in carving the block, which isn't what the viewer sees. The viewer doesn't really realize that, but the craft has gone on before the viewer really gets the print. So check the corners for the Kento marks, and imagine that the Navajo red shirts, which are right here, are coming from that little spot. And the back side, you can check that too. So let's go over here. We're going to start serigraph, and it is taking place in New Mexico. These, of course, are New Mexico too. Here's a description of the serigraph process. Here is the print which we've mounted, which I showed you. It isn't the same print, but it's not the same proof, but it's the same image, home of a Spanish cobbler. And that was here. The monogram was here, but in this print it's not there, and I'll let you find it. Anyway, these prints, the serigraphs, were done on a wove paper as opposed to a Japanese paper. One reason she adopted serigraphy in 1944 was because she couldn't get Japanese paper anymore because of the war. And you can't make a block print, at least she couldn't, without using Japanese paper. So she had to change techniques. And Vernon Hunter and Louis Ewing were just introducing serigraphy in Santa Fe at that time. She was there on the spot. She actually knew Louis Ewing. You can't imagine the intimate interconnections of artists in this time. She knew Louis Ewing before she even arrived, and lived in his house where he was teaching music, and it's kind of a complicated, long set of stories. But the woman journalist bought that house, owned that house, and then the Halls bought it from her, so they're all tightly interconnected in Santa Fe. That house is at 922 Canyon Road, by the way. It's a fantastic house, one of the oldest houses in Santa Fe. They just excavated the floor in one of the rooms and found a lot of Native American artifacts. So anyway, another print, Sanctuario. It looks like we've made a mistake here, but we haven't. We've called it by its correct name, Santuario, but when Norma first made her first prints, she put a C in it, and this is an early print, so you see the C is in that. But then later she realized it shouldn't have been there, so the later prints are corrected. Two more views of the Santa Fe area, New Mexico. This one is called Laguna Pueblo, and this one, Spring in Santa Fe. I think there's more for me to learn about this print. I think it was probably a commissioned print, but I can't prove it yet. I'm not sure. So, on down this way. These three prints, they have the word Mexican in them. One is Road to the Village, one is Mexican Farm, and this one is Mexican Road. So I asked family members, had she been to Mexico? No one really knew. Hi, Susan. No one really knew whether she had been to Mexico or not. The last day before I had just about to close complete content entry for my book, I discovered a few photos from which these were drawn. I could not believe it. I had 10 minutes to get this, almost. I had one day to get this information to the publisher because I had found where they were, which was at Monterey. I found these cards that said they were in Monterey, and they had images similar to this. So that then I knew, but I wasn't able to find that out until almost the last minute. Down here, more New Mexico. These we have put separately. They are also serigraphs, but they are put separately because as she developed her skills in serigraphy, these are all from about 1947, she became more and more sparse in her composition. She began to eliminate lots of what one could consider extraneous detail, getting down to more of the fundamental composition. And these have a strong compositional form, and that is why. She's left out omitted detail that she had been putting in earlier. And I said we'd go around the edge, but let's just turn here because we'll still stay in New Mexico if we look at this island. On the far right, another view similar to Navajo land. This one's called Shiprock. It's obviously the same thing. That's Shiprock too. This one is called Shiprock. Strong foreground with a distant background. This is a really lovely print, probably one of my favorites. Done in 1939 before they even moved to New Mexico. They were making trips down there from 1931. They'd get in their car in Kansas, in Howard, Kansas, drive down to New Mexico, stay 10 days or so, and come back. This Laguna skyline, we have another one over there of another image of a pueblo. This one is Laguna. It's sort of 60% sky and not as much. The interest is in the sky, as it is here and as it was over there in Navajo land. Back to her figures, she never really forgot her figural designs. She was heavily trained in figures, starting at the Portland Art Association and then also at the Art Institute. She had extremely, very outstanding figural training, especially from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So she's back to her figures here. Here we wanted to put two sleeping pueblos together because she did two sleeping pueblos. The top one is a block print. This says serigraph, it's wrong, we're going to change it. This is a block print, and this is a serigraph. They're obviously the same image. And then there were other images. The same thing was published and distributed from a paper company. I've forgotten which one. I have it. If you look in the Catalogue Raisonné, you'll find it. The Catalogue Raisonné numbers are at the bottom. So if you go to number 83, it should tell you. But there are reproductions of this, and one would know that simply by looking on the back and seeing that it's the advertisement for a paper company. But not all people do these or realize, these things. So. I'll stay on this side a little bit longer, then I'll go over there. The top image here, this is something I really want to emphasize. The top image, it's called Desert in Bloom at Westward Look, is a photo engraving. It is not a serigraph or a block print. It's not an original print. And that's why I want everybody look at me. I'm teaching this. This is not an original print. I want you to hear that. It is a photo engraving, and next to it is a serigraph. And we put these two together because, and this is the screen was rather large here, and you can pick out the little squares in this particular print, and you can make out the serigraph character of if you look at any of the simple things where you don't confuse colors, you just look at one color, you'll see that. This is a zone of color that's made from a light-sensitive plate, and I wanted this to be exhibited because the Halls made these in the 50s. There were about 5 different images that they made with a Babcock and Burrow, a gift company, a gift card company in Albuquerque. And they are misrepresented as serigraphs on the internet. So pay attention. And this is a metal plate signature. In the margin, I've seen this print on sale on eBay with a forged signature. So you have too, Eric, right? Yep. So you have to pay attention. And anyway, so we put these two together so you can look at the character of a serigraph. These are always called serigraphs, but they're not. So, just to let you know. Then here's the famous haying in Vermont, where she was seated with Diamond Dave in the hayfield. This is the image, the print that resulted from that visit to Vermont, which was where her nephews lived. And we have some of the family from that branch of the family who are here today. I'm so happy to see. So this, the golden maple, won some prizes. It's probably a Kansas view. And then here, 2 other views, and I wanted these to be together because they have such a Japanese look. They are both these trees probably they probably were done in Kansas. This kind of sky with the faded color, the change in tone from going from yellow to blue it's a Japanese technique, which you also saw in the Tourette sur Loup print, which I showed in the slides. And that print is right here. So you can see these are strong Japanese influenced prints in the way she's interpreted the skies. Now, if we could start right behind you, we'll just start with Europe right here and go this way, and we'll be finished with most of the descriptions. From here down and around the corner are her European views. These were done from drawings which she made between 1925 and 1927 when she was in both Scotland and France. And that is all. I've read that she was in Italy, but she wasn't. It's only, these were the 2 places where she went. They lived for 2 years in those places. I have an arrival time because they sent back a postcard on the ship saying we arrive in Glasgow tomorrow. That was in June of 1925. And then she finished her studies with Noel Rook in 1927, in June and July of 27. Learning to carve blocks. So she spent a lot of time studying these things. Anyway, here is Washerwomen of St. Paul. This print It's the only one I could get. It's not in very good shape. It's been light burned, so it's got a darker quality than you would think. So you have to mentally take that away. But it's these women at a lavoir under a vault in this village of St. Paul, which we discovered behind a fountain. It wasn't at all visible like this. Norma left the fountain out. And then this is the village fountain, which was up a little higher in St. Paul, up the road, up the street, up a serpentine path, really. And this is called Street Sweeper of Antibes, back to her figures. I spend a considerable amount of time in the book discussing her training with figures and her use of her implementation of her training. We move along here. This one, Provençal village. This is one I couldn't really identify. There's just not enough information for me to go on. But anyway, she called it Provençal village, so we know it as that. It's a lovely print done in 1925, one of her earliest. This brings up the question about dating and how one researches the dating. There were a number of things that I used for dating the prints. First, when in the early period of her printmaking, she captioned her prints in cursive. She didn't write out the letters. She captioned everything. So this one is a Provençal village, and it's written in cursive. So, and she did not switch to printing the letters until she got to Street Sweeper of Antibes. Half of the Street Sweeper of Antibes prints I've seen are with the squarish formal letters, and half are with the cursive. Of course, I want to get the cursive because it's the older of the prints. It would have been one of the earlier prints made, but that's neither here nor there. It's not that important. Anyway, so that's one way I dated the prints. Another way was through the papers. And I could see a certain kind of paper that would be used for a while, and then it would stop, and you would see another kind of paper being used. And it pretty much fell together when I was able to identify the prints based on exhibition lists, which is another way. You find where the print was exhibited. That was tough, though, because a lot of the places where they exhibited hadn't. The Printmakers Society of California was a tough thing to find, but I finally did find them in Pasadena, and I have their complete run of all their exhibitions. And I was able to see that she exhibited there frequently, and those dates helped a lot. Even the European papers measure, when you measure them, they measure out in even millimeters. And the American papers or other papers will measure in inches. So when one sees something that's 525 millimeters, one could be suspicious that this might. So I haven't really studied standardization in papers. I think it's a complex problem. But more research in that way might reveal more. But I'm sure that some of these papers are from Europe. This one, the end one is, for example, the ones that are called sludge papers, that I call sludge papers. They were papers, they're not good quality papers, but they were papers in which she printed some of her early prints. It was a commissioned print done in 1942 for a society who had 200 members. And if you were one of those members who'd paid your $6.50 or your $5 or whatever it was in 1942, one of these would arrive in the mail for you. So it doesn't say that, but if you look in the catalog, you'll find that it's defined that way. Then here's Tourriette-sur-Loup with its Bokashi sky, with this sky that fades from the light, and also the love of these crepuscular moments when the light's changing or when the sun is rising. And for this one, I couldn't tell. I was at Tourriette, but I couldn't really tell whether this was a daylight or a daytime falling or a daytime rising, or the sunrise or the sunset. It was a little bit hard to tell. But these panoramas, these were something that Norma loved to do. And we found the places where she sat. A white place in the road. You know, in Europe, 60 or 70 years isn't too much. But here, you know, it would be on your third building by that time in that spot maybe, but there, not so. So, in some of the prints I found considerably more development and growth of buildings below, but still the same images. I even found the same buildings in some of, even the same tree in one of them. So, these are all the European views. Here's the Villefranche-sur-Mer. This is a print that I love. Nice figure. I found this street in Villefranche. It was easy to find because the cornice on the roof bends, and this is a monastery garden where that shrub's coming out, still there. So, and there's a date on that building, 17-something was there. So, it's still there. She changed the colors a little bit, or somebody painted them since then, but it's still there. Then over here we have 4 views from Scotland. And one of my favorite prints is that Portrait Bay print, which we talked about earlier. She enjoyed doing these crofts. So, a Highland croft. This is a croft at Crianlarich. This is Portrait Bay. And this one is Cottage and Sky. This is the one on the end that sold for $1.49 at Goodwill in Portland, and someone bought it and took it to Antiques Roadshow. I told you about it upstairs. It was $1.49. Right after the program was over and I'd found out about this, I did go to the local Goodwill and look around.
What did they appraise it for?
$1,200, as I remember. So the Portrait Bay print is this one. And that is the one that appeared on The American Architect in 1931. And that's the one that I got from the antique dealer in Boston who said, oh, well, would you like this letter that goes along with it? So that was a really wonderful find for me that day. Now, this is a really lovely print, and if you take off the bottom 2/3, it becomes another print. Let me show you this, another Japanese image. And of course, Portrait Bay is a real place. I've been to Scotland and I found where they lived on Drummond Street in Edinburgh, but I have not been to, we just couldn't work in Portrait Bay. So, if you're not all tired, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Was there something in graduate school, some professor who gave you the inspiration to do this kind of research? Not just the subject matter, but the breadth of the kind of research and the direction that the research took you?
Well, Holly and I were graduate students together, so I can see she might ask it for that reason. Yes. I think I was taught a kind of thoroughness and the idea of going down different avenues, picking the tiniest little clue and seeing what you can turn up. And after having done this and done this with other projects, I realize how valid it is and how it could seem sort of silly, but it takes persistence, I'll admit. It does. But yes, I think so. I think I learned that from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Yes, Eric.
What medium did she use to record the images when she was out in plein air before she went back and cut the wood blocks?
I think she probably did, she would have done drawings, and they talk about that they did drawings. And I think she would have done some colors, or as on the vegetable vendor, she's written down colors, and she did color some of those things. And some of the parts of the vegetable vendor had been colored. Also in that vegetable vendor, she changed her mind because she put gouache over one of the colors and changed it to a different color. So I think she was toying with the idea of what the colors would be in some of the early initial drawings before she plunged into the carving.
Because I've not seen any gouaches in the market on any of these images. So I've not seen any original gouache art which would have preceded these.
Well, the two in the corner are the only two that I have. Finding drawings by Norma is rare thing. Those are the only ones I've ever seen. I've been actively looking for 10 years. Yeah. Yes, Jonathan.
It's pretty unusual for an artist not to date their works at all.
Well, I think some do and some don't. And I think Norma just didn't care. You know, it wasn't her thing. She was professionally trained, very well trained. She was trained to exhibit everything she made, which is something that any good school would teach. That's how you know, that's your job. That's how you become a professional artist. So she did exhibit everything that I didn't ever find, I have found, let's see, put it a different way. I found 4 titles that I don't have images for. That means I found those in exhibition lists, but I can't find the prints. I cannot come to the prints. So if you ever find any of them, let me know. I mean, they're in there now. The one I'm most curious about is one called Mountain Farms. It was a large print. It was exhibited in Boston in 1929, I think. And I cannot find it. So, but does that, I don't know. I think she just didn't care, and the way I dated them was by the exhibition lists and by checking the way the monograms evolved. I could do that, and the papers, and any little morsels of references that I could find in an archive or somebody's letter or something. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for coming, and I hope you like the show. Thanks.